Hello everyone, my name is Giraton and welcome back to Bakugan Advance, the show where we cover the more advanced topics of the Bakugan Pro TCG. Today we will be covering a rather universal TCG concept, but in the context of Bakugan. Experienced TCG players likely already understand nearly everything in this video. It's rather universal and a well-known subject for such games. It is important to learn for new players though, so we will be covering it today. Today's points in the video will be: what is Cut Advantage and why is it important? Cut Advantage terminology, how to gain Cut Advantage, the unique aspects of Bakugan Cut Advantage game, why lost cards don't matter to Cut Advantage. Let's get right into this would be simple, but surprisingly complicated topic. So, part 1. What is Cut Advantage? So to begin, we have to define Cut Advantage. The simple, most straightforward definition of Cut Advantage in TCGs is that the more cards you can play, the stronger you are and the more likely you are to win. So having more cards to play than the opponent means you are likely winning the game as a whole because you are stronger than them. This doesn't mean just the cards in your hand though. In most card games, this includes the cards you already have active in play and able to be played with no additional card cost from other areas of the game. For example, in Yu-Gi-Oh, there is a lot of cards that have effects that can be played from the graveyard, normally by banishing the card from the game, and those cards can account for Cut Advantage calculations. Bakugan-wise, this means that the heroes and gear you have in play can account for Cut Advantage, but for working out if you are winning the game, you may have to ignore what they do or only apply them as advantage under certain conditions. It gets a little weird, so let's try to rein this back before we go too far. For the purposes of this discussion, we will be focusing on hand-based card advantage, meaning the more cards you have in hand, the stronger you are, not including other factors. Card advantage nearly always refers to the difference between players and not a player's own situation. So if you use a card and your opponent negates it with their own card, then the card advantage is technically unchanged. Part 2. Card Advantage terminology. There are a few pieces of terminology we should go through before continuing in relation to Card Advantage. I've used these in previous videos and will not be using them during this video, but it should be understood because I will be using them in future ones. Plus, minus, X. A plus or minus of a number, normally +1 or -1, in terms of card advantage, often means you are gaining that many cards worth of resources. For example, playing any action card is inherently a -1 to your card advantage, as it costs a card from your hand, and it's not a static effect that continues to affect the game. However, Shun Kazami is a +1 every time you open a Bakugan with it on the field, as it draws you a card from your deck, but until you do, that it's considered a -1 from your hand. There is also the case of hand discard from your opponent's hand. The card Rite of Darkus is a -1 to yourself, to a -1, -2, or -3 depending on how many Darkus guns are on your team, meaning your advantage gain at the full power of Rite of Darkus is +2. Net zero. Net is a mathematical term referring to the final result of an equation, normally used for money. TCG players will use the term to calculate the result of a combo to work out how much card advantage was gained or lost, but they may skip using the term entirely when referring to plus or minus advantage and just use the earlier terminology of just minus or plus. Net zero specifically though is much more commonly heard, as it refers to the fact that you can go through a combo that gains and loses card advantage, but overall means you end the combo with no change to the total advantage of both players. An example of this is Shun Kazami. If you play Shun late in the game and you only draw one card from it, doing so for the rest of the game, then Shun has given you a net zero card advantage, as you played the card to gain a card. If you were to draw no cards from Shun because your opponents used Garganoid's Gaze on it as you played Shun, then it is also a net zero advantage, because both you and your opponent has lost one card in total. Remember that advantage refers to the difference between the players and not just to one player. Cantrip. A cantrip is a card that costs no card advantage upon resolution but still performs another function, often a weak one at that. The term originates from Scotland as a reference to light trickery magic done by witches, and was then used to refer to the easiest spells to use in D&D. Eventually this moved to Magic the Gathering as the term we use in TCGs today. In most cases, this simply means the card says draw a card, while also having another effect such as Deep Dive, which re-rolls your Bakugan while drawing you one card. It's a helpful type of card to consider, as these cards effectively cost less to play even if the actual energy cost is higher. Part 3. How to gain card advantage. You probably worked out how card advantage is most commonly gained, and that's by drawing cards. But that's not the only way to gain advantage. You will always lose some advantage to win the game. Every TCG works off that exchange. But the trick is to mitigate the loss while still advancing your game plan. For Bakugan, this means the fewer cards you have to use to win a brawl, the better. This is done a few ways, and it's why initially powerful B-Power Bakugan are so strong, as they require fewer cards to win fights, sometimes none at all. Using cards that give the highest B-Power for their cost, or higher cost actions that give high B-Power, can also be ways to gain more power for fewer cards in your hand. Forcing your opponent to play more cards than you is another way to gain advantage, and this is normally done by simply being stronger before you need to play any cards, or having static bonuses like Bakugear that, while having somewhat average bonuses for what they are, stick around and can create an advantage over time. Destroying or negating your opponent's ability to gain more advantage is also effective, as while it's a net zero to begin with normally, the fact that your opponent could have gotten more over time means that you stopped potential advantage loss. There is quite a number of other methods to gain and lose advantage, but thinking about it constantly means you can build better decks and play better with more foresight. Just remember not to focus on it too hard. You still need to spend your advantage to win most games, and you do have a hand limit of 7 cards in this game. Part 4. Bakugan's Card Advantage game. So Bakugan has a few unique aspects to its card advantage game in comparison to other TCGs, and it's playing with these aspects that makes you better at this game in particular. Bakugan is a high tempo game, and I'm making a video on that subject eventually, but basically because you don't have to play any monsters to the field, and the ones you do have aren't destroyed at any time during the game, the normal TCG gameplay of ward control is not nearly as important in Bakugan. This means that each turn is more impactful on the game and is generally faster. There is also a factor of energy to consider, as energizing a card from your hand at the start of your turn is a -1 from your card advantage, but a required cost to play most of your cards. This leaves a few things to think about. 1. Higher cost cards inherently have a higher advantage cost compared to lower cost cards. A lot of players miss this. You don't want to be energizing every turn in most games. I often stop at around 4 energy unless I end up with dead cards like flips or need it for higher cost cards in the late game. 2. Higher cost cards give higher B power, meaning that by using higher cost cards, you use less cards in hand. Additionally, most high cost cards give more total B power than multiple copies of lower cost cards that add up to the same total energy used. Identifying what cards give the most efficient B power boosts can save more cards in hand in the game. However, this does clash with the previous consideration of energizing costing hand cards. That's the game you have to play during deck building and play. 3. Heroes, Evos, and Gear can all provide an ongoing bonus, and that bonus can save the usage of later cards or give a direct card advantage bonus, but they can only do this if they are used over multiple turns in most cases. For example, let us use a gear. Let's say we are using Aqua's Plate and we don't have a cost reduction core. Aqua's Plate gives a static plus 400B power for 3 energy. Ice Barrier gives the same boost for 2 energy, and Tides gives the same boost if you trigger Flow, which costs 1 additional card to perform, but it costs 1 energy to play. All of these are Aquos, so you are theoretically working off the same power balance. So Plate is the most expensive energy-wise, and you can only use one of it on a Bakugan, but it sticks around over time. Ice Barrier and Tides both don't stick around, but they are cheaper and can be used multiple times in the same turn for each copy at hand. A full costed Plate is only worth 1 card the turn it's played, but it counts as an additional card each turn it sticks around. But because of its cost, it also costs energy cards and can't be played, at full cost without additional cards mind you, till turn 3. This means that by the time you can get it out at full cost, you could have played 3 Tides and 2 Ice Barriers, and each of those are 1 card lost advantage for the same boost the Plate gives. You can look at gears as an investment in card advantage. You pay energy now to cash in on it on higher card advantage the next time you roll that Bakugan. The gear essentially gives a +1 card advantage the next time it's used, since you do not have to play it again. However, you can win more games using Tides or Ice Barrier because they can be used earlier and you don't have to energize as many cards. Winning a fight is nearly always worth 1 card at advantage, but any more and you should have better means of getting the advantage back. There are other small factors that can change up how the game is played. Obviously, missing rolls gives the opponent the game advantage without the cost of card advantage, and there are probably a lot more things that many players have just passing thought about during play. But this is just a small list of factors, and I find them to be the most important at this game at the moment. Part 5. Cards lost to the graveyard don't matter to card advantage. This one's probably the most important myth to bust when it comes to new players and TCGs. Fortunately, Bakugan's life deck mechanic forces this mentality to be broken. Basically, unless your deck has an extremely fragile combo, the cards that go straight to the discard pile are not lost card advantage, and ultimately do not matter in the long run. In other TCGs, the strategies known as mill would destroy cards from the deck, and many new players and some experienced players would not like this deck destruction, as it would feel bad to lose cards that could have helped. The problem with this mentality is statistics. Before a card was milled, you were just as likely to be able to draw that card and use it as if you were to not, because it was at the bottom of the deck. You just wouldn't know until after the game. Cards being milled feels bad because you are suddenly faced with the what if scenario. Ultimately though, you have to play the game with the understanding that drawing any given card is a statistic, and that card getting milled, while certainly denying any chance of you getting that given copy of a card, was still just a card you didn't get the chance to draw. The reason I am mentioning this in this video is because some new players to TCGs tend to confuse having the correct cards as being card advantage, and that milled cards are lost card advantage, when that is 100% not the case. So, in summary, card advantage is the difference of cards you have access to at any given point of a game compared to the opponent. The higher the advantage over the opponent you have, the more you could do over the opponent. You can gain advantage, or plus, by drawing more cards than the opponent, playing less cards than the opponent, charging less energy, etc. And you can minus your advantage by playing more cards than the opponent, charging energy, or not drawing as much as the opponent. You often have to spend your advantage to win fights, but you want to get a good deal on that expense. Cards that stick around give value over time, but they need to last over multiple turns to give as much value as most one-off cards. Lost cards are not part of card advantage, only the cards that you and your opponent have access to at any given time. Often the player who holds the card advantage the longest wins the game, but they still have to win the game through damage. I hope you enjoyed today's Bakugan Advance video. If you did, please leave a like, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and comment below if you have any questions, thoughts, or criticisms on anything in today's video. Extra special thanks to Herosphere for Twitter, as well as Jared, who has appeared on this channel before, for helping writing out the script. I've had a few people take a look at it, and I thank them as well, but the extra thanks goes to Spear for giving me several script rewordings and better examples. This video is part of Baku Month, where I release 3 videos a week this month, all Bakugan related. I hope you are enjoying it so far. Oh, and finally, we have a Twitter and 2 Facebook pages in the description. I talk about random Bakugan and Beyblade stuff on Twitter, but the Facebook pages give news and updates for tournaments of each game. And with that, I'll see you next time. Kirito out.